The opinions expressed on this program are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect those of Cable 14, its sponsors, or its shareholders, Cogeco Cable, Shaw Cable, and Source Cable Limited.
And welcome to For the Record for December 15th. I'm Doug Farraway, sitting in for Jackie Vandinther. On today's show, the Council Edition, your chance to hear from one of our Hamilton City Councillors about what's going on at City Hall, around the city, and in his or her ward. And our guest today is Ward 5 Councillor Chad Collins. And Chad, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Doug. It's always a pleasure.
What a late night at City Council, one of the longest council meetings in some time. I remember some of those, the good old days when council meetings might run past midnight and then we'd rush tape back to the radio station to get it processed. In recent times, you don't really go that long. You do a lot of your discussions and dickering, if there's going to be any, at the committee level. Not last night. That was a full agenda, and it was dominated by the story of the last 10 days. I'm not going to go the gate route and call it that, but certainly the mayor's office has been under the gun about the awarding of a 33% increase in pay for his chief executive in his office, Peggy Chapman. Last night, you led off the discussion, and at times, Chad and Councillor, it got kind of heated in there. But as you pointed out, the public really wants to know what is going on, what was the timeline, who did what, when, and what is council going to do about it?
That's right, Doug. And you know, one of the most unfortunate aspects of all of this discussion is that there are so many issues facing our community right now. We have all kinds of challenges and opportunities in front of us. And so we're on the verge of, or we've already started the 2012 budget process. We're in discussions with many unions. And we've said to the community by and large that we're going to try to get to a 0% increase in taxes this year. And so it's come about at a time when we're talking about some very important issues in this community. And as I said yesterday, you really can't go anywhere from Stony Creek to Flamborough without hearing someone raise the issue of the $30,000 increase. And you know, whether it's in the homes and residences of the residents in the city across Hamilton, or whether it's in the businesses, the factories, it's the topic of discussion. And by and large, over the last week, I think people have, you know, they're trying to figure out, you know, how this came about. We've heard different versions, certainly from the mayor, and thankfully he came forward and clearly apologized for, I think, what happened last week in terms of the accounts as to how it came about. He's now on record as stating that, in fact, it was his decision. And I think that was a big step forward for everyone to try to get us to the next stage of all of this, and that is what happens now that the $30,000 has been granted. And residents have been phoning and emailing all of us. They're outraged. That's clearly the case in all parts of the city. They want to know what council's going to do about it. And so last night I raised the issue with our legal staff as to what recourse do we have in light of this increase, in light of the fact that it's crept into the negotiating process with our unions, who we've clearly told that, you know, money's tight at City Hall. We're looking for a 0% increase. We've said to the residents, by and large, that we want to hold the line on taxes. And so there's much more to this than just, you know, what the mayor's account of what happened and what transpired. It's more about what the vision is of the city and what values and principles do we hold as a community as it relates to how we spend our money and what value we get for it. No one's disputing the fact that there are people in the organization who make that amount of money. The question is, Doug, you know, how did we go from someone who makes $90,000 to $120,000? And what's the response from the office who clearly granted that? Council hasn't been a part of those discussions, and so we're trying to get to the bottom of things. And we need to be respectful through this whole process. And I think last night, as you mentioned, it was a very long meeting. We reached, I think it was 11 or 11:15, and decided that we would hold this over for a couple of days to clear our minds and certainly to recharge our batteries and ensure that when we go through this debate, we're going to do it in a very respectful way.
There are still outstanding questions. Does council have the authority to roll this back Does this pay increase fall under different guidelines that have been set out at the city? Is this purely the mayor's decision out of the budget that is given to him by the city of Hamilton to run his office? All of those questions were out there. You sought legal advice. Certainly the city solicitor did not want to do anything outside of an in-camera session, and that is what is coming up next. What do you foresee happening coming out of that in-camera session, though? Because there is the big question. What will happen? What could transpire?
Good questions, Doug. And you know, the problem I think that we all see with this issue is it's a personnel issue. And what makes it a little unique is that the office of the mayor, we're not certain yet who disclosed the fact that the increase was coming, whether it was the Mayor Bertina himself or the employee in question. The amount was actually disclosed right here on Cable 14 in terms of, I think it was Laura Babcock and Larry Deaney one night on the O Show who disclosed the fact that there was going to be a $30,000 increase. And that information came clearly from the mayor's office. And so we're caught between there being an issue of certainly an element of confidentiality and personnel, but I think as you heard last night, and you were in the audience, you heard from councillors that this is a very public issue. The public wants to know how it came about, and I think it's incumbent upon the mayor and his staff to come forward, clearly explain how that thought process occurred over the last several weeks. You know, why was it that it was originally HR that was blamed for the increase, and you know, how did the story change over a couple of days to the point now where we understand clearly that it is the mayor's decision and was the mayor's decision, and then how do we get past this whole trust issue? And I have to say that the dynamics around the council chamber for the past year have been a very positive one. Council by and large, 15 people around that table from wards 1 through 15 have tried their best to get along. We had the tag of a dysfunctional council last term of office as we went through the stadium debate. In every generation, we seem to go through an issue that divides council and the community. Red Hill's a good example of that, where we had neighborhoods versus neighborhoods. We had half of council supporting it, another half who had some issues with it, and the stadium debate was no different. And so this term of council, I can honestly say with great conviction that council set out at the start of this term to ensure that we were going to lose that label of a dysfunctional council, that we were going to try our best to work together. And for the first year, I think we've tackled many difficult issues that have plagued us. Pan Am, we seem to be around the stadium debate. Area rating, we passed one of our lowest budgets in a decade and one of the lowest in Ontario last year at less than 1%. We're aiming to do the same in 2012, and so I think we've made great progress. And when I go around the council table and I look at individual strengths, you know, everyone has contributed in some shape or form. You know, even the 3 rookie councillors that we have been a great addition. I mean, there's certainly a learning curve to the job, but they haven't been shrinking violets, and they've been certainly involved in almost every major decision that we've made. And so, you know, around the council table, we've done a great job at trying to keep an element of decorum and civility within the council chambers. And so this, again, as I said before, it couldn't have come at a worse time. And we're trying as best we can to get to the bottom of things without becoming, you know, without making it personal and without, you know, dragging us back to where we were in 2009 and 2010 as we went through the Pan Am debate.
Well, over the last month, I've been observing committee meetings and going to council meetings, and I've seen the congeniality amongst council members. I suppose now I need to ask this question. Is the onus now on Mayor Bertina to get on side with the rest of his council? Because the perception is out there, and people have talked about this when Bob was the alderman or councillor for Ward 2, that he tends to run off on his own ideas and does not necessarily work well with others. Is this the moment in time where he has to step back and look at how unanimous the council appears to be and get on side?
Well, it's important, Doug, that everyone get along. And I'm not suggesting for a minute that, you know, our decisions need to be met with unanimity. You know, no one elected councillors to city council thinking that we're going to have some kind of a Stepford system there where we're all going to vote the same way. We're going to have a difference of opinion, but I think it needs to be done in a very respectful way. And I think clearly we've shown that council by and large around the table has a strong track record in this first year in getting along. The mayor is definitely our leader, and we can't function without his involvement or his leadership. And so I think it was an important first step as we deal with this issue that's come about with the $30,000 pay increase from his office. It was an important first step for him to admit that in fact it was not HR, it was in fact his decision that was made, and hopefully we can do some or undertake some bridge building exercises over the next month to ensure that as we go through and start the 2012 budget session, that we're all working together and we're all running in the same direction. And again, we're not going to agree with each other at all times, and we're going to make mistakes. We're going to make them individually and collectively. But at the end of the day, I'd like to think that the community has a desire that their council, when they're meeting and when they're discussing these very important issues, are going to do it in a very respectful way, and the outcome is going to be a positive one for the city.
Well, we're close to a resolution on that #1 story, and now we have to start thinking about making this into an hour-long show. We have to move along. That was a major issue, but there was another significant issue that came out of the council meeting, and that was Councillor Marula's attempt to find out how much the City of Hamilton has paid so far on its legal costs in a 7-year court battle with the federal government. He raised it. I believe you second the motion to find out what are the current costs. It seemed to me, observing last night, get broken down to what we have paid out in fees and disbursements so far for legal advice. And we got that number because council wanted that number, and it's a significant number of $1.3 million. But Councillor Collins, that isn't all the cost, is it? And no one seemed to know what that number might be when it came to staff at the City of Hamilton and how many person hours have been devoted to this 7-year legal fight.
And the legal fight is a very important one, Doug, and as you know, the expressway was delayed for many years. That project goes back, I think, to the 1950s, well before the time that I was born, and so that debate dragged on for quite some time. In the final years of the design and leading up to the construction of that, as you know, the federal government applied legislation that our own local community and our council and our staff believed shouldn't have applied, and it delayed the project for several years. In fact, we've documented it cost us an extra $40 million to go through the hoops and hurdles that were created by the federal government of the day. And so we exercised our legal rights. We argued in the courts that in fact the legislation was applied in error, and we were victorious through the first round of the court battle. In fact, we were awarded $500,000 in legal costs. We decided again to pursue that legal argument in a higher court, and we're seeking the $40 million restitution. And as you suggested, our costs right now are $1.3 million. And just as we talked about the last issue, the importance of openness and transparency and providing the community with as much information as possible, collectively we decided that in fact now was the time to disclose the fact that we have expended $1.3 million, that the $40 million is still an important issue for council. We don't have unanimity on it, but we have majority, and we're going to continue to, through the court system, with the federal government, we're going to continue to push our case, again with the precedent having been set that the legal system has agreed to date that the city is owed those monies. And so, you know, the criticism that I leveled last night was it's very unfortunate that we don't have our federal representatives around the table with us. I think everyone, regardless of where you stand on the expressway, everyone would hope that we're not spending tax dollars on legal fees. And in fact, there's a precedent that was set in the late 90s when, if you recall, former Minister Copps inserted herself into the discussion that the city had when we had a lawsuit with the former Harbor Commission, $100 million in fact. And she politically took charge of the situation and proactively brokered a deal between the federal government and city council that eventually established the Waterfront Trust, transferred lands to the city of Hamilton, and in essence we brokered a deal out of the court system that contributed tens of millions of dollars in terms of property and resources to the city outside of the court setting. And so unfortunately our federal representatives, Mr. Sweet and Mr. Allison, they've been absent through this whole debate. They've been absent through the airport dealings that we've recently had with the contamination there. They were absent in the debate that we had with the stimulus funding. You know, we were owed $3.6 million. The province came to the table. The city has provided its fund, and unfortunately our federal representatives have been nowhere to be found on these issues. And I think now's a time for them to step forward and provide some leadership to ensure that we're not making our way through the court system for another several years, that in fact there might be an opportunity to settle this in a different way for the benefit of everyone who lives in Hamilton.
More contentious words to throw at you from last night's council meeting. The words would be Pan Am costs. The budget was to be passed in its entirety last night, but that number of $710,000 was pulled off the table for further discussion and disclosure of a breakdown of exactly where the dollars are going. You just have to say Pan Am around this council and you're going to get responses very quickly. Chad, right. If you could respond to what transpired last night.
Well, we've set aside our resources for the construction of the stadium. We set aside $5 million for the construction of the velodrome. My own personal position was I wasn't supportive, and I'm not supportive of the velodrome project. But by and large, our staff have come forward to say that despite the fact that we've set aside capital dollars for bricks and mortar for those facilities that are to be built in the city of Hamilton, there are going to be planning and operational costs associated with that, one-time costs in the $700,000 range as you suggested, and that staff should be temporarily seconded to the Pan Am project to ensure that when visitors are coming to our community and those events do take place, that they're well planned and they go off without a hitch. There has been some debate around the council table, as you noted last night, around the fact that we were unaware of those costs when in fact we bid on the project. We clearly understood that there was a contribution for the stadium, there would be a contribution for the velodrome, and there would be a contribution, I think, in part for Copps Coliseum, some minor modifications to the building that would facilitate the playing of some games within that building. Nowhere, I believe, in the past documents that council had received were we made aware of the fact that there would be staff costs associated with running the event. And so that's where council, again, we need a sober second look at where the dollars are going to be spent. How are we going to afford it in light of the fact that we're looking for a 0% in 2012? And some very valid questions from Councillors Clark and others about, why weren't we advised of this situation a year, 2 years ago when we were originally making a decision as to whether or not we should bid on the games in the first place.
Still to come, echoes of the past on the beach strip and a park for Jimmy Lomax. The Council Edition on For the Record. We'll be right back. And welcome back. You're watching the Council Edition of For the Record. I'm your host, Doug Farraway, sitting in today for Jackie Vandinther. And with us today is Ward 5 Councillor Chad Collins. We had a very busy council meeting. There is one other very large issue that is out there in the public domain right now. The MOE is basically suggesting to the city of Hamilton, you better clean up the pollution from the airport, from the 80s, from fire retardants that turned into known carcinogens that are right now causing problems in the Bimbrook Conservation Area and elsewhere. The Hamilton Spectator, in an editorial today, has basically said, this is the headline, clean up the airport pollution first and argue about it later. Councillor Collins, it doesn't sound like that is a way to proceed. Usually you need to name some names instead of just going ahead and cleaning up and then seeing who you charge the bill to. Your thoughts on this lead editorial from this day?
Well, I'd have to disagree somewhat with the position that was taken, and respectfully I would suggest that the city needs to, on more occasions than it has in the past, needs to exercise its rights. And if you recall, Doug, in the late 90s, the city decided to privatize the airport, which we had just assumed ownership from the federal government. And we had a bidding process. Two companies put a lot of money into the bid, and council was faced with a decision as to who was going to operate it under a private contract for a number of decades. I think the contract at the time was 40 or 45 years. And so basically the terms and conditions under that contract were the private operator would get to keep all the revenues from the airport, and rightfully so, they were going to pay for all the expenses. And so I fail to understand how under a private operation where the contract clearly states that the city is not responsible for any of the environmental issues that might come as a result of spills, either past or present, I fail to understand how the city and the taxpayers locally are now on the hook for the cleanup costs or the due diligence that would go into establishing what kind of money it's going to take to permanently clean the lands on the airport property and those lands downstream from it that have been contaminated from an operation that took place prior to the city's ownership. This is clearly an opportunity for the airport operators to say, yes, in fact, the contract does not state that the city is responsible, and we're going to work with our federal partners, Mr. Sweet and Mr. Allison. We're going to work with those partners to ensure that this is cleaned up in a timely fashion. Why everyone comes back to the city on a regular basis when for tax dollars on issues that we have nothing to do with, I fail to understand the logic in that. I certainly wouldn't discount the fact that we are a stakeholder in this process. Councillor Johnson has done a terrific job, and by extension, Councillor Clark have done a terrific job in terms of bringing this issue to council and making us all aware of and understanding the importance of having the area cleaned up in a timely fashion. But at the end of the day, again, there's no reason why under a private contract the citizens of this community should pay $40,000 for the due diligence or for the higher costs of permanently remediating those lands around the airport.
Outstanding. There are several beach strip issues, and I think they all tie together in an interesting way. You had several delegations at the Planning Committee meeting. One of them was Hamilton Habitat for Humanity. The beach strip, and I believe the first home was on Athens Avenue?
Natman's Drive, that's right.
Okay, yep. And now there is a second proposal for Habitat for Humanity, a home to be built on another property. And the city is basically, I got it, bending over backwards to welcome these folks to Hamilton with affordable housing. And Chad, it ties into something that Burlington is now debating, that Hamilton and the region of Hamilton-Wentworth debated a decade ago, stopping the purchasing of properties for green space in Confederation Park. And Burlington is dealing with that now, major story going on in Burlington. And they're now wrestling with transforming their policy to what Hamilton adopted. Talk about that transition. How many properties are now available, the growth on the beach strip, the life that is coming back to the beach strip, and how it ties in with the Hamilton Habitat for Humanity.
Great questions. And Doug, as you know, there's a long and storied history on the beach strip. It is a very unique and special community, and I have enjoyed over the years working with the neighbors to make their neighborhood a better place to live. And I can honestly say that it differs than many other communities that or neighborhoods that you'd see across the city now. It's a neighborhood where people still know not only their adjacent neighbors, but they know all of their neighbors' 10, 20 houses from their own residence. And that's, I think that trend that we might have seen in the 40s and the 50s, certainly prior to my time, where everyone knows the families in their neighborhood, that's long since passed. But on the beach strip, it remains. And it is ironic, as you say, that Burlington is now going through an issue that this neighborhood faced 20 or 30 years ago. And it was during my mom's time on council, during the 80s, that council had a policy where we were going to purchase and demolish homes on the beach and as you suggested earlier, extend Confederation Park and make that entire area from Grays Road down to the canal one giant park. And one of the challenges that council of the day faced was the fact that we had no sewers on Beach Boulevard, and the lake levels pushed the groundwater up through the ground and right up to the front doors of many of the residents there. And so it became an issue of quality of life. Council of the day decided that it was too expensive to make the neighborhood work and decided to purchase a number of the old cottages and the old homes on the beach strip. About 200 homes were purchased over the course of several years, and the community, and again it's thanks to their efforts and their councillors at the time and the council of the day, decided that that was not the most fiscally responsible thing to do. It wasn't the most prudent thing to do, and in fact there was life in that community that was worth saving. And they eventually reversed that decision. And over the years, council has had to grapple with not only the maintenance of those lots, but had to determine exactly what they were going to do with a neighborhood that had all kinds of pockets and holes in it. And even today, if you were to travel down to the beach strip, you'll still see a lot of vacant property. And so over the last 10 years, I've worked with the beach community with the neighborhood plan that they in fact had adopted in the 1980s to reestablish the neighborhood, to breathe new life into it, and to reconstruct some of those pockets that have been left to decay for several decades. And so we're in a position now where we've sold all of our vacant properties along the lake. We have bayside properties that I think they're about 60 in number, still to sell, and we're actively marketing those on the open market to prospective purchasers and new homeowners. And so we've done a fairly good job, and what's unique about that arrangement, all of the funds that the city takes in from the sale of those lots are reinvested back into the beach neighborhood. And so in the about 10 years ago, as you know, Doug, we constructed the beach trail, which has been tremendously successful. And it's done wonders not only for that neighborhood, but for the image of the city as a whole. And we now have hundreds of thousands of people coming from other parts of Hamilton and from areas outside of our city to use that trail. So we've used those monies to reinvest and rebuild the neighborhood. And one of the most important decisions we made locally and in that neighborhood most recently was the development of a park that we renamed in honor of Jimmy Lomax, who spent over 50 years of his life dedicated to helping families around this time of year. And it wasn't just young children. Jimmy made his way into hospitals and into seniors' homes. And I think in his final years, he was up to raising, through his Operation Santa Claus, about $250,000 annually and distributing about 70,000 to 80,000 gifts locally. And I think he represents really what the beach is all about and what Hamilton's all about. We are a very caring and giving city. And Jimmy, as I said, donated almost all of his extra time and some of his own personal resources to try to improve the lives of others, not just in the beach community, but across the city. And I think the city owes him just so much in terms of the legacy that he leaves behind, and his wife Susan, in fact. I mean, she was as much a part of Operation Santa Claus as Jimmy was. And so I think it was very fitting that the city paid tribute to both Jimmy and Susan several weeks ago in not only developing but naming a park after Mr. Lomax for all that he's done for our community.
One of those people who kept the beach strip alive, Jimmy Lomax, Reg Wheeler, his name comes to mind, who fought for the beach strip. Look, we're running out of time. I can't believe how quickly it has run by. In about 20 seconds, can you tell us what's happening with the Beach Canal Lighthouse and the Lighthouse Keeper's Cottage?
Well, we're trying to help the volunteer group that's done wonders to try to save these two very old buildings that have significant cultural, historic and cultural value. And we're hoping that the federal government will see fit over the next several months to transfer those facilities to a group that's trying to raise public and private funds to restore them and to put them to good use. Unfortunately, the city's not in a position to take them on as city assets. We have Ockmar, we have St. Mark's that we're struggling to deal with financially. And so I'm hoping, Doug, that over the next year or so that council will play an important part of contributing to, maybe in a financial sense, lending our staff resources to this group to save two very important buildings that mean a lot, not just to the beach community, but to the city in general.
Ward 5 Councillor Chad Collins, thank you so much. A very informative show. That is the Council edition of On For the Record for December 15th. We will return January 12th. Happy holidays, everybody, and thank you for watching.